Good morning, grade 12s. The topic that we are going to cover today is basically the introduction to the foreign exchange market. You can find this on page 81 in chapter 4. Okay, so when we look at the foreign exchange market, we said also in chapter 1 that each country has its own currency. So every single country has got their own monetary unit that they are using at local level. And that currency is legal tender only in the country of origin. Okay, what legal tender means is basically that it has to be accepted in return for goods and services. Like in South Africa, obviously Rand is our legal tender. So nobody in South Africa, no shop, no trader can refuse to accept Rand because it is legal tender. But the Rand is only legal tender in South Africa because this is where we use it as a currency. Okay, so sometimes it can happen that a currency is used by a trading bloc, okay, like for example in the European Union, all the countries, different countries are using the same currency, which is the euro. All right, but as a rule, obviously each country will have its own currency that they use in that particular country that cannot necessarily be used in other countries. And when countries are involved in international trade, each country expects to be paid in their own currency. So if we trade with America, for example, when we import stuff from America, we will be expected to convert our rands into dollars so that America can be paid in dollars. And this exchange of currency happens on the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange market is basically the market where one currency can be exchanged for another so that trade transactions between different countries can be facilitated. Okay, when I say that internationally the US dollar is used as a base currency, generally speaking, if we look at international statistics, it is normally expressed in a common currency. Remember, we cannot make comparisons between different countries unless we express it in a common currency. And the US dollar is the currency that is used for that. And basically, every other currency is linked to the dollar in order to determine its value. So there will be a Rand dollar exchange rate. There will be a euro dollar exchange rate. The base currency, the yardstick that we basically use to measure the values of different currencies is going to be the US dollar. Okay, this here is your definition of the foreign exchange market. Okay, we also did this in chapter 1. The foreign exchange market is the market where people can buy and sell foreign currency, so where one currency is exchanged for another. And remember, it doesn't necessarily have to have a specific location. Any market, no market has to have a specific location. We can do a foreign exchange market can exist on the internet. Okay, when we do EFT transactions on the internet, one currency is exchanged into another. But it can also have a specific location. In South Africa, for example, all of our banks, the major financial institutions, all of them are authorized dealers in foreign exchange, so they will be an example of a foreign exchange market. The leading markets where foreign currencies are sold internationally is found in London, that is in England, New York, which is in America, and Tokyo, which is Japan. In South Africa, as I mentioned just now, our foreign exchange market consists of all the authorized dealers in foreign exchange. And as I said, that includes all the major banks, as well as businesses such as American Express and Thomas Cook. In South Africa, you will see as we go through this chapter, you have to be authorized to deal in foreign currency. Nobody can just decide to buy and sell currency. You have to be authorized by the Reserve Bank in order for you to legally buy or sell currency. And the reason for this is that the value of the Rand is determined by demand and supply. So every single time somebody buys or sells currency, that is going to affect the value of the Rand. So it has to be controlled in some way or another. Okay, then the next definition that you can see there is the definition of an exchange rate. Obviously, this is also very important. An exchange rate is the rate at which one country's currency can be exchanged for another. So basically the price of one currency in terms of another. That is what we mean when we talk about the exchange rate. And exchange rates can be expressed in two different ways. When we are back in class, I will show you on the currency table. Literally, there's a direct method of quoting the exchange rate and an indirect method of quoting the exchange rate. When we use the direct method of quoting the exchange rate, Basically, we are saying what is the domestic price of foreign currency. All right. So in other words, this means in South Africa that the price of any foreign currency is expressed in terms of the rand. In other words, how many rands are we going to give to obtain $1? All right. So the domestic price of a foreign currency, $1 equals how much rand? How many rand do we have to give to sell to buy $1? Okay, that is the direct method, and this is the one that we know the best. This is the one that is used in the news and in the newspapers when we are literally saying the rand is 14 rand to the dollar. Okay, that is the direct method because we are saying how much rand we have to sell in order to buy $1. If we look at the indirect method of quoting the exchange rate, we are going to ask what is the foreign price of our domestic currency. So in other words, it means that what is the price of the rand in South Africa in terms of another currency. So how much dollars do they have to give to buy 1 rand? All right, so if it's $1 equals how much rand, that is your direct method. If they ask 1 rand equals how much dollar, that is known as the indirect method of quoting the exchange rate. Okay. Right, now we do have certain foreign exchange controls in place in our country. Okay, and that is the different forms of controls that is imposed by the government or by the Reserve Bank on the buying and selling of foreign currencies by private residents. So basically they are controlling who gets to buy and who gets to sell these currencies. So that obviously, as I said, because it influences the price, every single transaction where rand is exchanged is going to influence the value of the rand. So they basically have controls in terms of who can buy currency, who can sell currency. Okay, one of the controls, for example, is that if you want to buy foreign currency, nobody can just buy foreign currency just for no reason. You can only buy foreign currency if you can prove that you are going to be traveling overseas. You literally have to take your plane ticket to the bank and your passport and prove to them that you are going to travel internationally. I think you can get it 30 days before you leave South Africa. So you can't even buy currency like today and only travel in 6 months' time. You can only get it the 30 days before you actually go overseas. And then there's also a limit on the amount of currency that each person can buy per transaction, and the amount of a limit that they impose on how much currency a person can buy per financial year in a particular financial year. All right, this is obviously to avoid that people dump huge amounts of rands on the markets to buy other currencies, because that will cause a big depreciation of the rand. All right, so it's just different ways that they use to control kind of who buys and who sells and how many currencies we are allowed to buy and sell. All right, but we are going to look at this in more detail later on in this chapter. Okay, so the next important thing that we're going to look at is the demand and supply of foreign currency. In other words, how are foreign currencies formed? The exchange rate. How is the exchange rate formed? The price formation. The price of one currency in terms of another is the exchange rate. So we want to see now exactly how is the exchange rates of different countries determined. All right. Now, on the foreign exchange market, obviously this depends on the type of exchange rate system that is used in a country. We have fixed exchange rates, we have floating exchange rates. So this example that I'm going to do with you now with price formation, this is based on the floating exchange rate system, where the value of the rand is determined through the interaction between demand and supply. Okay. So on the foreign exchange market, our exchange rate is determined by the interaction of demand and supply. As I said, every single time that somebody is buying currency or somebody is selling currency, it is changing either the demand or the supply, and that will also change the exchange rate itself. Okay, so demand and supply of currencies, where does it come from? Why would there be a demand for currency? Why would there be a supply of currency? That originates from international transactions. Okay, so for example, if there's exports, if South Africa is exporting goods to America, in America, obviously, they would have to pay us. And in South Africa, we expect to be paid in rand. So if America has to pay us for the exports that we've sent them, they will have to convert their dollars into rand to pay us. So what they would do is they would sell their dollars. It will create a supply of dollars in order to buy rand, so create a demand for rand so that they could pay us. On the other hand, if we are importing from America, It means that we have to now pay them, and they expect to be paid in dollars. So what would happen is if we have to pay America, we would have to sell rand on the market, creating a supply of rand so that we can buy dollars. So there will be a demand for dollars. Okay, one thing that you have to understand very clearly is that there's always, in every transaction where currencies are sold, there is a supply of one currency to create a demand for another. Okay, so immediately if there's a demand for rand, it is automatically going to create a supply of dollars because they will have to sell dollars in order to buy rand. One currency is being exchanged for another. All right. So when there's imports, as I said, it's going to create a demand for forex. This word forex is just a shortened version of foreign exchange. And foreign exchange literally refers to any currency that is not ours. Okay, in South Africa we use rand, so dollar is foreign currency, yen is foreign currency, the Chinese yuan is foreign currency, the euro is foreign currency. It is any currency except for the one that we use in our country will be foreign exchange for us. And the word forex is just a shortened version of foreign exchange. So as I explained just now, when there's imports from South Africa, if South Africa imports, we have to pay America. That is going to create a demand for foreign exchange because we have to buy dollars to pay them. And when there's exports from our side, that is going to create a supply of foreign exchange because obviously the Americans will have to sell their dollars in order to buy rand to pay us. All right. So the interaction between this demand and supply, obviously we're going to use a graph to explain this interaction. Okay, so I'm going to go to the graph. Okay, now what is very important when we work with these graphs, it can get very confusing. So it's very important that you understand certain things. Okay, your graph is always going to have a heading. Okay, it's going to say demand and supply of. It can be demand and supply of US dollars. It can be demand and supply of yen. It can be demand and supply of Chinese yuan, any currency. Okay. Whatever currency is here in the heading, okay, if this is the demand and supply of US dollars, the price has to be in another currency. So obviously for us, we're in South Africa, so we're always going to view it from our perspective. Okay, and that is very important in this chapter, that when we talk about exports, we are talking about South Africa's exports. Obviously, our exports is imports for America, but we're always going to explain it from the South African perspective. That is very, very important. Okay. So in the interaction on the graph, we're always going to work with two currencies. If this is the demand and supply of US dollars, the price has to be in rand. If it is demand and supply of rand, the price has to be in a different currency. It has to be dollars or pounds or yens or whatever. Okay, so like any other demand and supply curves, the price will be depicted on the vertical axis and the quantity of currency will be on the horizontal axis. But the first thing you look at when you have graphs, okay, relating to foreign exchange, you look at the heading. You want to know, is this the demand and supply of dollars or is this a supply and demand of rand? Because that makes a huge difference, okay? In this case now, it's the demand and supply of dollars. So the price of dollar is going to be in rand. Okay, now when we draw these graphs, and I want you've got this graph in your book, I want to see notes. Okay, while I'm explaining this graph, you are writing on your graph what I am writing on mine so that you can actually interact with your graph and make sure that you understand. Okay, so if we draw a demand graph, okay, obviously demand has a negative slope. Okay, so your demand curve is always going to have a negative slope like any other demand. The only difference now is we are not drawing the demand and supply of apples. We are drawing the demand and supply of dollars. Like any other goods and services, the demand curve will have a negative slope because the law of demand says the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. So there's an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. That is what gives the demand curve its negative slope. All right. Just remember, whenever we draw a graph, we are also going to label the graph. Any graph that is not labeled is not going to give you any marks. If there's no label, there's no mark. Okay, so there's your demand curve. It is negatively sloping. Okay, if we add the supply curve now, Okay, the supply curve obviously has a positive slope. All right, because the law of supply says the higher the price, the higher the quantity demanded. So it always has a positive slope. And as I said, we have to label our graph. Okay, the supply graph will be labeled SS. Okay, because there's no label, then there's no mark. Okay, then very important, where the demand and supply intersect. This point where they intersect, that is going to be our equilibrium point. Okay, we always indicate equilibrium with an E. All right, doesn't matter a capital E, a small e, E1, E whatever, but E. It must be an E. Okay, and at the equilibrium price, obviously we have to indicate the price and the quantity. All right, so in this case now, okay, I'm just going to give it a number. Okay, if we look at this, the equilibrium point here, let's say that this price is going to be, we make it realistic, 14. Okay, and then if we look at the quantity that we are going to find at equilibrium, okay, we go down to the axis and we're going to find the quantity there. Let's say that this quantity is 100. Okay, now what is important is you have to be able from this, okay, because obviously we're trying to see how exchange rates are formed. The exchange rate is the price of one currency in terms of another. The way that this graph is drawn, it's demand and supply of dollars. So we are basically finding the exchange rate. What is the price of dollar in rand? So how much rand do we have to give to buy $1? Okay, now when we write the exchange rate, okay, what is important is that you always understand the exchange rate price. Now, the price is 14 Rand. That is the equilibrium price that we found here, 14 Rand. But it equals to, your exchange rate is not 14 Rand equals $100. That is not what we are saying, okay? The price of the dollar in terms of Rand, it means that 14 Rand is the price for $1, okay? But at this price, at a price of 14 Rand for $1, there is 100 people that is willing to buy dollars. So if the price is 14 Rand to the dollar, 14 Rand for $1, there will be $100 that will be bought and sold. All right, because that's where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied is equal. But your exchange rate is going to be 14 Rand equals $1. Okay, so you have to be able to draw these graphs. Obviously, these graphs are going to get more complicated. We're going to see in further lessons what is going to happen if the demand or the supply changes. If there's an increase in demand or a decrease in supply or whatever, what is going to happen to this exchange rate? This graph is very, very basic. They're not going to keep it this simple. The graph is going to get much worse. Okay, so just remember all the laws apply. The law of demand applies, so the demand curve has a negative slope. The law of supply applies because supply has a positive slope. Okay, where the two aggregates are equal, that is going to give you your exchange rate. Your exchange rate is 14 Rand to the dollar, and at that price, $100 will be bought. Okay, but now, what is going to happen if, for example, now we increase the price? Okay, we know that if we increase the price, let's say to 16 Rand, okay, if the price goes to, if the exchange rate increases to 16 Rand to the dollar, what is now going to happen? Okay, I'm going to do it in a different color so I make it clear. Okay, at 16 Rand, we can see here that my quantity demanded is going to be there. All right, we know that the law of demand says the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. At 16 Rand to the dollar, our market is not in equilibrium. Okay, we're not in equilibrium, but what has happened is at a price of 14 Rand to the dollar, 100 people were willing to buy dollars. If we increase the price to 16, okay, and we go and see now, we find the corresponding quantity, you will see that the quantity demanded has decreased. All right, our quantity is now lower. All right, so if we literally give that a value now, we might say that there's now only 80 people that is willing to buy buy dollars at this price, okay? Because the law of demand says the higher price, the lower the quantity demanded. So at 14 Rand to the dollar, there was 100 people that was willing to buy dollars. If the value of the Rand now goes up, okay, the value of the dollar basically goes up, we have to give more Rand for $1. The Rand is depreciating. The price of the Rand is, the dollar is getting more expensive. So instead of giving 14 Rand to the dollar, now we have to give 16. Immediately you can see that the quantity demanded decreased. It decreased from 100. Now only 80 people are willing to buy dollars because it's now too expensive. They don't want that. Okay. But if we look at what happens to the quantity supplied, okay, at 16 Rand a dollar, if we carry on with this graph and we move it all the way to the supply curve, we can see that the supply, the quantity supplied, actually increased. All right, because now, because the law of supply says the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. Okay, so if we find this value now, you're going to see that the quantity supplied actually increased. All right, because it used to be 100, there used to be 100 people that wanted to buy at 14 Rand. Okay, when the price was 14 Rand, there was 100 people that was willing to buy dollars or to sell dollars. Now, if we look at the supply now, they're willing to sell the dollars. Now, if the price goes up to 16 Rand, all of a sudden now, there's like 120 people that is wanting to sell their dollars. All right. Obviously, if you are a buyer, you're wanting a lower price. If you are a seller, you are wanting a higher price. Okay. So at 14 Rand, the market was in equilibrium. Okay, 100 people wanted to buy, 100 people wanted to sell. But if the Rand depreciates to 16 Rand, okay, or if we increase the price to 16 Rand, we can see that the quantity demanded is now decreased to only 80, and the quantity supplied has increased to 120. Okay, now what this is called, okay, at this point, at a higher price, okay, because the price is higher, it is going to show us that your quantity supplied, is going to be higher than the quantity demanded. All right, there's more people wanting to sell their dollars and what there is people wanting to buy the dollars. All right, quantity demanded is only 80. Quantity supplied is 120. So there's 120 people that want to sell their dollars, but there's only 80 people wanting to buy the dollars. All right, and this is going to cause on the market a surplus. It's going to cause a surplus dollars. There's going to be dollars left over. There's more people wanting to sell than to buy. All right. And what is going to happen to this? Obviously, there's 120 people wanting to sell. There's only 80 people wanting to buy. So these people wanting to sell, they're going to start realizing that, oi, there's only 80 people wanting to buy. If I want them to buy my dollars, I have to decrease my price. Okay, if my price stays at 16, we are not going to get all the dollars sold. If we want to sell all the dollars, we have to start decreasing the price. And that is exactly what's going to happen. Automatically, demand and supply automatically adjusts, and prices will go down a little bit, until it goes back to 14 Rand to the dollar, because then 100 people will buy and 100 people will sell. Okay, so when there's a surplus dollars, a surplus of anything, prices tend to decrease, okay, because the sellers are wanting to decrease their price so that they can encourage buyers to buy. They know that if they want to sell, they need to decrease their price. Otherwise, the buyers are not going to buy. Okay, at that high price, there's just not enough people that is interested in actually buying. Okay, if we look at the opposite situation, okay, if we look now at, just want to keep the quantities the same. Okay, if we go now to a lower price, okay, my equilibrium, remember, is still at 14 Rand, but what is going to happen if the price goes to 12 Rand? Okay, if we say the price is no longer 14 Rand, the price is now 12 Rand. All right, so what is going to happen if the price decreases? Okay, now in this case, you can see at 12 Rand, my quantity supplied is now only 80. So from equilibrium, where there was 100 people wanting to sell, now at a lower price, there's only 80 people that is wanting to sell their dollars. So the quantity supplied decreased, which is in line with the law of supply, saying that the lower the price, the lower the quantity supplied. Okay, But in the same way, okay, if we carry on with this line, we will see that if we extend this line, then we go to the demand until we touch the demand curve, we can see that quantity demanded actually increased. So instead at equilibrium where there's only 100 people wanting to buy at a lower price of 12 Rand, now there's 120 people that is wanting to buy the dollars. Okay, so now the quantity demanded increased, which is in line with the law of demand, saying that the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. Okay, but the situation that we are now facing is that obviously our quantity demanded is higher than my quantity supplied. Okay, so the difference here now is that my quantity supplied is less than my quantity demanded. All right, and what that is going to cause, it is going to cause a shortage of dollars. All right, there's now 120 people wanting to buy the dollars and only 80 people wanting to sell. Okay, and what's going to happen, automatically your demand and supply will adjust. The suppliers are going to realize, but oh, why am I selling for 12 Rand? Okay, there's 120 people wanting to buy. Some of them know they're not going to get the dollars. So if I start increasing my price, little bit, these buyers, they know that there's not enough dollars for them. So they are going to be willing to pay more. They're that desperate to have the dollars. They are going to be willing to pay a little bit of more money to obtain the dollars, because people that's not willing to pay the money will not have the dollars. And slowly but surely the market will adjust and the price will go up a little bit until it gets back to 14, where the market is in equilibrium. Okay, so make sure that you've made all of these changes, that you've added all of this information that is not in on the graph in your textbook. Make sure that you add all of this information on your graph, so that when you look at the graph, you understand what is happening there. Okay, obviously you can pause this video, rewind or whatever, and write what you need to write. Okay, so if we go back quickly to the lesson, okay, you'll see I've basically drawn this graph with you now. Okay, this graph is exactly the same as what we did basically. Okay, I just redid it with you. And here's all the information, everything that I discussed on the graph. Okay, I said equilibrium is where demand and supply is equal. The price is on the vertical axis, the quantity is on the horizontal axis. Okay, and then I explained then if we change the prices that I use here is obviously based on the graph in the textbook, not on the one that I've drawn now. But if the price changes from 6 Rand to 5 Rand, less Rand has to be paid for a dollar. Okay, we call that an appreciation, but we will discuss this in detail in lessons to come. All right, when less Rand is given for a dollar, it means that the Rand is getting stronger, so the Rand appreciates. But automatically the Rand appreciates, it means that the dollar is depreciating. Okay, so I showed you exactly on the graph how to find the equilibrium. I've spoken about the slopes of the different graphs. Okay, and then this is that last little bit that I explained about the excess demand. Okay, if the demand is bigger than the supply at the lower prices, your demand is going to be bigger than supply. So there's an excess demand. Okay, so suppliers are not willing to supply too many dollars. Your quantity supplied have decreased because it's not worth it for them. They're not getting a lot of Rand for their dollars, and that is going to put pressure on prices to increase. All right, and when prices do go back up to equilibrium, quantity supplied will increase again, quantity demanded will decrease until equilibrium is reached again. When there is an excess supply at the higher prices, obviously there's an excess supply of dollars. Everybody wants to sell their dollars, but they're finding it very difficult to find people to buy their dollars. So they keep accepting less and less. As I said, they decrease their price little bit, so that they go back to equilibrium eventually again.